Okay, and we're back with another edition of our Klub Outside Q&A Round-up series. Now, as always, Kubo takes and answers a variety of questions directly from fans over on his personal Q&A platform, and then we try to dissect those answers and see if there's anything of value to be found there. A lot of the time, Kubo's comments are a mix of light-hearted chatter and fluff, but sometimes we're given real, genuine insight into the story and world of Bleach that, for whatever reason, just wasn't found in the original material. As before, I'm not going to be looking at every single answer ever given, nor necessarily looking at them in any kind of a chronological order. Mostly, I'm trying to curate the answers I find to be the most interesting, and this time, the questions revolve around the power of Aizen's Kyōka Suigetsu, the transformation of Nnoitra's Zanpakutō, the role of the Kidō Corps within the Soul Society, and a little more. We'll kick things off by discussing Kubo's comment regarding the extent of the power of Aizen's Kyōka Suigetsu, which might be even more broken than we first thought. As always, a huge thank you goes out to both Reiko and M Shadows for diligently providing translations to these questions and answers, links to which you can find in the description of the video. So, let's begin. It's a well-known fact that Aizen's Kyōka Suigetsu is one of the most powerful Zanpakutō in Bleach. With its ability of complete hypnosis or Kanzen Saimin, Aizen is capable of placing anyone under his spell simply by having them look at his Zanpakutō just once. From this point onwards, Aizen has total control over his victims' 5 senses, creating near flawless illusions that deceive the mind. The power of Aizen's Zanpakutō is so great and all-encompassing that I awarded it the top spot on my list of Bleach's most terrifying powers. Once he's ensnared you, you're under Kyōka Suigetsu's influence for the rest of time, and there is nothing you can do about it. Unless, of course, Aizen was ever killed, I suppose. But it means that with Aizen around, anything you experience could feasibly be a lie. Anything you see, smell, touch, taste, or hear, all of it is under his command. In one of the more recent Klub Outside Q&A responses, however, Kubo decided to take this power and make it even crazier, even more inescapable, in a way that, in my opinion, begins to defy belief somewhat. There seem to be just no limits to this ability whatsoever, though as you'll see when we take a deeper look at it in a moment, I do wonder if perhaps Kyōka Suigetsu was easier to exploit than the narrative maybe let on. Anyway, the first question, as translated by M Shadows, reads as follows. Kubo was asked if someone who was under Kyōka Suigetsu's complete hypnosis were to take a picture or video of something or someone that appears different to them due to the hypnosis, would said something or someone's real appearance be revealed to the hypnotized person in the picture or video taken? It's a good question, albeit not something I've ever really considered before, but it potentially offers a roundabout loophole way of breaking through Aizen's hypnosis. That being said, I think the reason I've never really considered it personally is because, despite some of the technological advances found within the Soul Society, Aizen has never really come across any situation, and probably never would, where someone might have access to that technology, so I guess I've just never really thought about it. But of course, Kubo responded by saying, if the person taking the photo or video is already under hypnosis, then they will not be able to see the real thing. Okay, so there you have it. Kyōka Suigetsu is somehow even more broken than we first thought, and we already thought it was pretty broken to begin with. At this point, I feel like it must go way beyond simple illusory powers, although admittedly, truth be told, there was never anything really simple about Aizen's power to begin with. But for the spell to work on someone to the point where even an outside source that isn't intrinsically connected to Kyōka Suigetsu in any way, that isn't even living, still deceives them, then their mind itself has been seriously affected here. It reminds me a little bit of when Tsukishima's Book of the End was suddenly revealed to be able to work on inanimate objects too. It just adds another ripple to this already incredible power, taking it surprisingly to another level out of nowhere, almost when you thought it perhaps couldn't get any stronger. But seriously, with this revelation, it feels like an attempt by Kubo to lock down Aizen's powers even further to prevent any possible loopholes from being exploited, and it does work in that sense. But this answer makes it clear to me, if it wasn't already, that Aizen's Kyōka Suigetsu affects people on a truly individual level, but in a way deeper sense than I think was maybe first thought. That's what I mean when I say it must be warping their minds to some degree, and that is genuinely terrifying. To think that Aizen's Kyōka Suigetsu has the power to afflict someone's mind for the rest of time, essentially, after just one look at the blade. So basically, no matter the method of delivery, the victim of Kyōka Suigetsu will always see what Aizen wants them to see. And I wonder about the permanence of that as well, in a sense, and how this power really works. Is it something Aizen has to consciously keep up? For example, say somebody like Isane, who is under Kyōka Suigetsu's spell, took a photo of Aizen's illusory corpse for medical research purposes or something like that. To her, the photo would show the fake corpse, when in reality there is nothing there. Or maybe it was Aizen's Zanpakutō, whatever it was. Either way, it's not actually a corpse. Let's say 5 years pass, and Isane finds this old photo she took long after Aizen has been imprisoned, and so everybody knows the truth, everybody knows about the illusions. Does it still show the fake Aizen? If so, that's kind of ridiculous to consider, and a little bit mind-bending. Even if Isane knows the truth at that point, will it still show her a lie? That opens an entirely new can of worms, to be honest. Once Aizen's schemes had been exposed to all, and even those under his spell knew the truth, what happens to photos of objects that they know in their mind to be false? Do they revert back to what should really be there, or do the people just have to accept that they are now seeing a lie even though they know it to be false? That sounds extremely weird to process, to be honest, and I assume that Kyōka Suigetsu isn't something that Aizen needs to maintain on a constant basis, or else it would just be impossible for him to execute his plans in the way he did. Which means it will constantly and passively affect people even through other mediums that aren't linked to Kyōka Suigetsu in any way. Unless we get another reveal down the line where Kyōka Suigetsu can affect the output of inanimate objects as well. I mean, imagine that. If someone takes a photo of an illusion and shows it to someone who isn't under the spell, yet they still see the illusion because Kyōka Suigetsu affected the camera instead. Now that would just be plain silly. Right, Kubo? Don't do it. One last thing I wanted to mention was the way Kyōka Suigetsu can surely be exploited, and I imagine some narrative gymnastics had to occur in order for this not to happen during the Soul Society arc. Kyōka Suigetsu is extremely powerful once someone is enraptured by its spell, but to everybody else, well, it doesn't change a thing. We know, of course, in the Soul Society arc that Aizen had used Kyōka Suigetsu on all of the captains and the vice-captains, but what about literally every other officer in the Soul Society? When Hinomori finds the dead Aizen, for example, that was presumably in the vice-captain quarters, which explains why there is no one else around. But what about when Aizen's body is transferred to the 4th Division? Was there not a single random nurse around who came into the room and was like, Captain Unohana, there's nothing there on that table. I thought that would have been a really interesting and funny conversation. Anyway, this does only serve to strengthen Kyōka Suigetsu even more, as photos and video evidence may have been a potential out for a victim, but no, they really are trapped in their own illusory world no matter what. And that is kind of horrifying. And actually, here's another question for you to end this segment on. If someone took a photo of a person, looked at that photo, and then they were placed under Kyōka Suigetsu's spell, and Aizen manipulated it so that they saw something other than that person, would the photo then change to kind of catch up to their perception, even though it was taken before the victim was placed under the spell? Personally, I think in that situation the photo probably wouldn't change, but either way, it's scary stuff to envision. Up next, Kubo gave us some insight into the 5th Espada Nnoitra Gilga and his changing Zanpakutō. Nnoitra has one of the most pronounced, imposing, and arguably recognisable Zanpakutō in the series, with his base weapon taking the form of a gigantic crescent moon-shaped double axe equipped with a lengthy handle and a connecting chain. And yet, in the past, back when Nnoitra was only the 8th Espada, his Zanpakutō looked noticeably different, featuring only one crescent arc as opposed to the 2 it has in the present. Considering Nnoitra was lower on the hierarchy at the time, and that it has been a little while since then, the obvious conclusion here is that he was weaker during that period of time, and his Zanpakutō reflected as such. But one person sent in a question regardless, asking, "I'd like to ask about the change of shape in the Zanpakutō belonging to the 5th Espada Nnoitra. In the flashbacks during the time he was the 8th Espada, there was one crescent-shaped part, but later it increased to 2. What's the primary cause behind this change of shape? I'm thinking that it involves factors such as amplifying the amount of basic Reiatsu and changes to the mind and body through training, but what do you say?" So I mean, unsurprisingly, this commenter has come to the same conclusion. While it could have been a purely cosmetic change on Nnoitra's part, perhaps to go along with his new spoon-shaped collar, an Arrancar Zanpakutō is a reflection of their innate hollow power. If Nnoitra had grown considerably stronger in the time Nell spent away from Hueco Mundo, and we know that he did, then it makes sense for his Zanpakutō to reflect those changes. And so Kubo answered as follows, saying, "It's a change in the quantity and inherent quality of his Reiatsu. And Arrancar's sword is their power itself, so changes in Reiatsu are likely to manifest in shape." Pretty straightforward overall. Nnoitra was the 8th Espada during Nell's time in Hueco Mundo, but after she returned he had been promoted 3 places to the 5th Espada, which is a significant jump, and he himself even mentions how much stronger he's become in her absence. So I guess it makes sense from that perspective. The only oddity I find with this, though, is that I can't think of any other example off the top of my head right now of an Arrancar's Zanpakutō changing in appearance, especially that drastically, due to them getting stronger over time. And yet surely someone did at some point. It's also conspicuous that it seems to have really only affected one of the very few Espada, or Arrancar for that matter, with an unorthodox-looking weapon. I've seen some people saying that Harabel's Zanpakutō looks to have changed or evolved in the artwork of her from the Bleach X calendar, what many people are assuming is her current-day appearance as of the Hell chapter, but honestly, I don't think so, just based on this artwork. I think she's just wearing a much more ornate sheath to go with her new regal appearance. What is interesting, however, about that new look is her mask, which appears to now extend upwards with a pair of spikes or something, so that definitely could indicate some change. But then again, take Grimmjow, for example. Between the Arrancar arc and the 1000-Year Blood War arc, his base Zanpakutō doesn't look any different, at least from what we can see in the short amount of panel time he has. So did his Reiatsu not improve during that period at all? Did he not get stronger? Or is any change in his appearance just manifestly smaller than Nnoitra's for some reason? I guess it could be that when Grimmjow attacks Askin, we see his hands take on that claw-like appearance briefly that I don't think ever showed up again in the source material. That could be a reflection of Grimmjow's strength, much in the same way Nnoitra's Zanpakutō changed, but then I don't know why it would be Grimmjow's body changing as opposed to his Zanpakutō. Baragon is another intriguing example as well, though I don't think it's quite the same. But we know he wields 2 separate or potentially the same axes. One, his Zanpakutō Arrogante in his Rankar form, which is a much beefier, squat-looking and rounded battle axe with a sinister red eye in the centre, complete with an elaborate handle. And then there's number 2, Gran Kaida, which is a much more gothic-looking, wicked, pure black axe with chains attached to it. Is there a noticeable difference between these two? Now, Baragon wielded Gran Kaida during his flashback before he was turned into an Rankar, so is this kind of the inverse of what we see with Nnoitra? Is the Zanpakutō we see Arrogante wielded by the Rankar version of Baragon a straight downgrade over Gran Kaida, as Gran Kaida is presumably Baragon wielding his true power as a hollow, the same he used to wield back in the day? Either way, it's a cool detail and nice to get that confirmed, even though I think it was the obvious answer to begin with. For the next topic, we'll be looking at an aspect of Soul Society lore that's been criminally underdeveloped so far, and that's the Kidō Corps. While not a part of the Gotei 13, the Kidō Corps represents another branch of the Soul Society's military. Mysterious and ultra-secretive, the Kidō Corps, as the name suggests, is filled with Shinigami who excel in the practice of Kido, and, well, very little else is actually known about them. They don't appear to have any kind of interaction with the Gotei 13 at all, and keep almost exclusively to themselves, only appearing when required to do something that no regular Shinigami can do that involves the use of great and powerful magic, such as opening the colossal Senkaimon that leads to the human world or releasing the Sokyoku. Interestingly, we also see several hooded Shinigami escorting Rukia to and from prison in the Soul Society arc, as well as going to help free Aizen during the Thousand Year Blood War arc. Now, I think these guys are also part of the Kidō Corps, but they don't dress in the same manner as the Shinigami that released the Sokyoku, for example, so it's hard to know for sure, but I'm pretty certain they are. 100 years ago, the appearance of the commander of the Kidō Corps, at the time Tessai Tsukubishi, at even a captain's meeting, the highest of the high, was considered a very big deal, surprising both Kyoraku and Ukitake, the latter of whom noted that Tessai hadn't been seen in public for a long time. But really, what do the Kidō Corps actually do in the day-to-day? There must be more to them than just manning the door to the human world and, presumably very rarely, assisting in an execution. When the Sokyoku was destroyed, do you think they kind of turned to each other and were like, well, that's us out of a job, now we've got virtually nothing to do? Well, as it turns out, a fan was also curious about this underused faction, asking Kubo, what do the Kidō Corps actually do, as they were once depicted trying to open a Senkaimon? While it's a pretty straightforward question, Kubo's answer is surprisingly robust, as he replied, the Kidō Corps are in charge of Kido R&D. More specifically, they're tasked with making Kido easier to use. The reason Shinigami can use Kido is because the methods of learning it have been well established thanks to the Kidō Corps' research. This is a really cool piece of lore that I wasn't expecting. So the Kidō Corps are much more akin to the likes of scientists or even alchemists than regular Shinigami, and presumably spend the majority of their time locked away somewhere attempting to craft and perfect spells. It is a little weird just how absent they are in the story of Bleach, and that extends to Tessai as well, who just basically disappears after the revelation that he was the commander, essentially, but at the same time it does also make some sense. If their main role within the Soul Society is the development of Kido spells, then I can imagine Kubo struggling to really fit them in anywhere, especially considering Kido itself doesn't have much of a presence in Bleach, sadly. What does confuse me, though, is why the R&D of Kido in particular warrants such secrecy. It's not like you've got competitors around, or even enemies around if you're just existing in the Soul Society. And yet the Kidō Corps almost seem to exist in their own world, but I mean, is that really necessary? It's interesting as well that their entire role is to essentially supplement the rest of the Soul Society and the Gotei 13 in particular. The Kidō Corps mainly exists to make Kidō easier to use for the rest of the masses, so I assume they spend some time coming up with these spells in a lab and then pass them on to the rest of the Gotei for use. To be honest, back in the day, I really thought that one of the Zero Division members was going to have been revealed to be the creator of Kidō, because that would have made a lot of sense to me. Tenjiro obviously turned out to be the creator of Kaido, which is specifically healing Kidō, but as for the blanket term Kidō itself, I thought that one of them might have been behind it. Does this mean as well that they have some access to the royal palace, since Ichibei was seen using Kidō spells, Hyaporankan, and even a forbidden Kidō as well? And presumably the incantations are also devised by the Kidō Corps in an effort to make them more stable to use for the general populace as well. While I suppose there was no real need to involve them in the story beyond what we already saw, the Kidō Corps does continue to fascinate me. Though that might have something to do with the fact that I actually really do like Kidō as a concept too. The idea of this secretive cult of Shinigami who concoct magical spells is awesome, and I'd have loved to have seen more, including of their inner workings. It's cool to imagine them poring over these ancient tomes, devising new spells and assigning them classifications before eventually sending them to the Gotei 13. You do kind of wonder, like, presumably they test these spells before they send them out to circulation, so where are they trialing things like Hardo 99, and who is down there that's strong enough to do this on the regular? Presumably that's when people like Tessai would have been involved. So yeah, a nice nugget of lore for the Kidō Corps, even if it does maybe reinforce why we don't see them much. To be honest, it's kind of cool having these additional branches within the Soul Society, even if they don't get really any exploring or explanation. It helps the world feel that much bigger. And to end this installment of the Klub Outside Q&A Round-up series, let's take a quick look next at a fairly simple answer. This one pertaining to Yhwach's new anime-exclusive ability that we get to see during his brief battle with Ichigo during Part 1, Qualkreis. Ichigo vs Yhwach in Part 1 remains one of the highlights of the anime so far, extended beyond what we saw in the source material and turned into a real spectacle to help cap off the first Quincy invasion in style. As part of that, Yhwach uses a new, never-before-seen Quincy ability called Qualkreis, with which to attack and trap Ichigo. The Quincy King summons a cage of crackling blue reishi, bolts of which rain like lightning down from the sky before they turn inwards and transform into Heilig Borgen, unleashing massive arrows that soar at Ichigo. Some even piercing chunks of debris before ramming into him from all sides. It was a neat new addition to Yhwach's arsenal, but a fan wants to know how it connects to other Quincy spells, asking, if Qualkreis is broadly classified as a Quincy tactic, could it also be considered one of the Kirchen lead? Please let me know if there is any lore around this. Now, I've probably butchered the pronunciation of that, but I chose this question because the notion of the Kirchen lead always intrigued me. Meaning church song, the term Kirchen lead only appears once in the source material, preceding Royd using the Quincy spell Zankt Zwinger against Yamamoto, in which he summons an enormous ring of holy light that, in his words, acts as the ultimate attack and defense that cannot be penetrated from the outside, lest you be struck down by the light of the Lord. As part of that activation ritual, several strips of what I assume a reishi flow from Royd's fingers, each one covered in Roman numerals. While Kirchen lead is never uttered again, this imagery does reappear during the real Yhwach's fight with Ichibei when he restores his power to himself. But yeah, this question interests me because I, and I think many others, thought Kirchen lead was essentially the Quincy version of Kidō when this chapter first released, and I was kind of hoping that we'd see a few more spells like this. But Kubo's answer tells a different story, saying, Qualkreis is one of the Quincy spells. Kirchen lead is not a classification, but a chant, for Sankt Swinger. That's very interesting. So essentially, in order to activate Sankt Swinger, you must first say church song, which doesn't seem like much of a chant to me. It's also a little strange that there are several other Quincy spells very similar in naming convention to Sankt Swinger, being Sankt Borgen and Sankt Altar, and none of them require the wielder to say Kirchenlied first. Either way, I thought it was cool that this particular reader felt the same way that many of us did back in the day. That Kirchenlied was essentially a Quincy version of the generic terms Hado or Bakudo that you say prior to any spell. But that's it for another installment of our Klub Outside Q&A Roundup, this time taking a look at some insights regarding AIZEN'S Kyōka Suigetsu, Nnoitra's changing Zanpakutō, what do the Kidō Corps actually get up to, and the Quincy ability of Qualkreis. Let me know which of those you found to be the most interesting, which you got the most value from, and how do you feel about each of these individual answers? Does this make AIZEN'S Kyōka Suigetsu that much more powerful to you? Are we now verging on this idea of reality warping, totally messing with people's minds? Is it gone beyond the point of disbelief now? How do you feel about Nnoitra's changing Zanpakutō, and do you think any of the other Ranka or Espada had changing Zanpakutō that maybe I missed? Do let me know down in the comments about that one as well. And of course, how do you feel about the Kidō Corps and the Quincy ability Qualkreis? All of that, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And as always, I want to end the video by saying a massive shout out and giving a huge thank you to my supporters over on Patreon. I really do appreciate each and every one of you so very much. Your support means the absolute world to me. If you want to support me over on Patreon, if you happen to like what I do here on YouTube that much, then you too can go and support me over there now to get your name in the credits just like this and to get every video I release absolutely ad-free. Alright guys, but until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.